Let's talk about shame. Shame is one of the most dangerous states we can get in, but where does it come from? How do we get over it? What do we use it for? Why is it even in us? So the Stoics, people like Seneca, thought shame was a useful tool. The prospect of shame in their thinking could keep you on the right path. And there's evolutionary theory that kind of bolsters this idea of useful shame. It encourages group cohesion. Individuals at the time would have been concerned over their value to their living group, because that can be a matter of life and death, right? If you think about our ancestors, if one of them got into a bad situation and they needed saving, the odds of the rest of the village getting together and actually trying to save them go up a lot if they are seen as useful, if they think that this person's life is actually worth saving. And so your opinion of yourself, acting in a way that creates perceived value to the group, acting in a way that makes sure that you're not rocking the boat too much, making sure that people don't think too poorly of you, actually has consequences to whether or not you can survive. People might have developed a sense of anticipated shame as a way to weigh out potentially negative actions and determine whether or not they're worth it. And that makes a lot of sense. You know, we tend to behave in ways more often that minimize disapproval rather than aiming to maximize approval. We tend to avoid losses more than we want to gain wins. Shame is a belief that there is something wrong with ourselves. Not simply like we did something wrong, but that we ourselves have something wrong with us, that we're lesser. Anytime there's a difference between how we see ourselves and the standards we think we have to live up to, we can experience shame. And if that happens over and over and over again, we start to internalize that, so it gets worse and worse, and we carry it around a lot longer than we should. It stops being just guilt over a behavior or a brief belief in shame that we can overcome, and it starts being an ingrained part of who we are. That can lead to hopelessness, it can lead to depression, it can lead to anxiety, and it can lead to some very negative spiraling. So how do we deal with shame? When we feel shame, we tend to retreat. No one really enjoys sharing things that make us feel ashamed. It's much easier to squish it down into a little toxic ball and just like stuff it inside of ourselves, but that doesn't really help. It just makes things worse. So the first principle we need to follow is not add suffering to suffering. What does that mean in practice? Well, the first thing we can do is start to name and even talk about shame with people that we trust. We need to use mindfulness skills to take the control away from the shame and confront it with our reasonable mind. So the same thing we talk about doing a lot, which is name your feelings. Get to the root of why they're there. Start exploring this stuff from a mindful point of view, either through meditation or through journaling. A lot of people have shame that extends back a long time. You need to go through our past and process the events that started this sense of shame. So again, journaling is really useful for this. We can start to deal with our shame in a journal before we take the next step and deal with it in the real world. Just like with social anxiety, shame can be a result of not living up to this external standard that we see, somebody else's values. So an important part of working on shame is getting our values and acting in accordance with them. That's how we start to develop a sense of self-esteem. It's not necessarily easy because we start to have to pull things apart a bit to even understand what our own values are. But when we act in congruence with our own values, our own belief systems, then we start to see our self-worth go up. Our sense of agency starts to go up because we are acting in a way that uses our wise mind. Our emotions, our feelings, our thoughts are all rowing in the same direction. So when we separate out our values from, say, our parents' values or our culture's values or society's values, whatever, we start to really distill down, like, what are the things that we think are important? What are the things that really matter to us, morally and all that kind of thing? When we do that and we start acting in accordance with those values, we build this base of self-confidence, right? But that's an everyday thing. So every day we want to take stock of that. Like, did I do the things I said I was going to do today? Did I act like the person I want to be today? when you start to tune your mind towards that stuff and you start to kind of catalog your wins, you take an inventory of how you behaved and say, you know what, overall, I was a good person today. That can start to help you get rid of that shame. You can start to see that in the balance, more good things in the plus column than there are things in the negative column in terms of my behavior. And then the shame can start to go away. People who have done some really terrible things can start to rebuild their lives, understanding two things basically. One, that typically like the things that they've done, the mistakes that they've made in their life, the harm that they might have caused often comes from like personal trauma, pain that they're experiencing, things that they've left unprocessed. So overcoming that in part is their own actions, correcting things, either through living better, becoming a better person, behaving towards other people in a better way. But also it comes from understanding that, other people around you are also experiencing those same things. So having a sense of shared humanity can help you get rid of shame too, because you start to recognize that we all have flaws, we all have problems, we all have insecurities. Speaking of which, shame comes from our insecurities, right? So be honest with yourself about that. Be honest with other people about that. The process of talking to people that you trust can be really helpful, whether it's people in your family, friends, or even if you find a support group, all of those things are really valuable. This is important because we can build up shame in secret. Shame is something that we always want to hide, and so kind of getting at it early can help you a lot. If you're, for example, say you're a new mom or dad, and you feel unsure of yourself, you're overwhelmed by this new level of responsibility that you're taking on. Connecting with other people can be really effective because it lets you know that you're all kind of in the same boat, you're in the same soup. Other people are having the same problems. They feel overwhelmed too. You can share solutions, and even if you don't necessarily have solutions, you know that you're going at this with more of a sense of community, more of a sense of connection. You're not the only one who's dealing with this experience. Everybody else is too. Dealing with shame is really a practice. It is a practice of well-being. Every day, you get up, you set your intention for the day, you do the best you can during that day. You recognize at the end of the day, give yourself a little grace. You're a human being. You may have messed up during the day. You may not have dealt with everything that you need to deal with, but you made some progress, and recognize the progress. Be grateful for what you have. Eventually, you'll start to reduce the amount of shame that you experience, or the times or intensity of the shame that you experience, and you'll start to increase your sense of self-worth.